Imagine your own husband handing you a single key and telling you to take your pack and get out, just moments after your own sister laughed in your face at your father's while reading. That was my reality. My name is Alara, and I never thought my life would crumble in a single afternoon. The room smelled of old wood and polished marble, the kind of scent that makes you think of finality. The notary's monotone voice blurred as he read through my father's will. My half-sister Brielle sat across from me, her designer heels crossed, her lips curling with a smirk she didn't bother to hide. When the notary said her name, she straightened proudly. 2 apartments, both in prime locations, handed to her without hesitation. Then came my turn. My father left me his elderly dog, Rex, and his 2 cats, Whisper and Shadow. That was all. For a moment, I thought there must be a mistake. But then Brielle's laughter cut through the air, sharp, mocking, cruel. He left me 2 apartments, and you get a zoo, she cackled, wiping a fake tear from her eye. And then, to my horror, Caleb, my husband of 12 years, laughed with her. It was a sound that cracked something deep inside me. When I turned to him, expecting comfort, all I found was a stranger. His eyes were cold, his voice colder. Well, now you have your own little pack. Pack your things and get out. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears. What are you saying? I whispered. Brielle didn't even hide her satisfaction as she looped her arm through his. My husband. My sister. The betrayal was so surreal, I almost laughed. Caleb pulled a key from his pocket and pressed it into my hand. You've got 1 hour. The lease is in my name. Don't make a scene. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, but all I could do was stare as they turned away together. The world that I had built, every shared meal, every whispered promise, collapsed like paper in the rain. I walked out of that room with a single suitcase and 3 bewildered animals staring up at me, sensing the storm in my chest. Rex whimpered as I opened the car door. Whisper and Shadow meowed softly, pressing against my leg as if to remind me I wasn't completely alone. I drove aimlessly, the rain beginning to fall, blurring the road ahead. My hands shook on the steering wheel, not just from shock, but from the realization that I had nowhere to go. No home, no family, no husband, just the soft panting of an old dog and the quiet purrs of 2 cats. Creatures my father trusted me with more than he trusted anyone else. As I pulled over by the roadside, tears finally broke free, and for the first time that night I whispered into the dark. Why, Dad? Why only them? I didn't know then that the answer was already around my neck, resting in the worn leather of their collars. But that revelation would come later. For now, all I could do was sit in that car, clutching Rex's fur, trying to remember how to breathe. The night I left everything behind, I drove aimlessly until exhaustion forced me to pull over outside a dimly lit veterinary clinic I vaguely remembered from childhood. The sign read Dr. Silas Reed, DVM. My father used to speak of him often, a man he trusted with both his animals and his secrets. My heart pounded as I stepped out of the car, clutching Rex's leash. I didn't know what I was expecting, maybe a kind face, maybe a place to rest. When Dr. Reed opened the door, the years had carved deep lines into his face, but his eyes were still warm. He took one look at me, drenched and trembling, and quietly said, "Arthur's girl." That simple phrase undid me. Without a question, he led me and my animals inside. The smell of antiseptic and hay filled the air, oddly comforting after the chaos I'd fled. He listened in silence as I recounted everything, the will, the betrayal, the cruel laughter. When I finished, he sat back heavily in his chair, his expression grave but thoughtful. "Your father was a clever man, Alara," he murmured. "Before he passed, he told me that if anything ever happened to him, I was to remind you to check the collars." I frowned, confused. I thought of Rex and the cats, their old collars frayed and worn from years of use. What could possibly be hidden in them? Dr. Reed handed me a magnifying glass and encouraged me to look closer. My fingers trembled as I unbuckled Rex's collar first. Beneath the leather lining, something metallic caught the light, a tiny plate engraved with the letters and numbers, GR W4. My heart skipped. Whisper's collar revealed another, marked R11. Shadow's had U7. These weren't random. My father had always loved puzzles, and this was unmistakably one of them. Dr. Reed leaned over the counter, his brow furrowed in concentration. GR W4. R11. U7. He whispered the code under his breath, piecing it together. Suddenly, his eyes widened, and he straightened, excitement breaking through his tired demeanor. "Granite storage," he said, almost to himself. Warehouse 4, row 11, unit 7. Then he looked at me, a hint of wonder softening his voice. Ilara, this isn't a goodbye. This is a key. Your father didn't just leave you the animals. He left you a message, maybe even something he wanted protected. The room seemed to shrink around me as realization settled in. My father hadn't abandoned me to shame or pity. He'd trusted me with something greater, something hidden beneath the ordinary, disguised in the loyalty of his pets. I stared down at Rex, Whisper, and Shadow, who watched me quietly, as if they understood. Hope, faint but fierce, flickered to life for the first time since that horrible day. Whatever my father wanted me to find, I was going to uncover it. Maybe this wasn't the end of everything. Maybe it was just the beginning. The next morning, Dr. Reed and I drove through the gray edges of the city, the air thick with dust and unanswered questions. My stomach churned with every passing mile as the old pickup rattled toward the outskirts. We finally stopped before a massive, weather-beaten storage facility with faded lettering that read Granite Storage. The place looked forgotten, the kind of space people used to hide what they couldn't bear to destroy. My heart pounded as we approached Warehouse 4. The smell of rust and old metal hung heavy as we walked down row 11. When we reached Unit 7, I froze. The padlock wasn't an ordinary one. It was a combination lock. I stared at it for a long moment until a memory surfaced. My father humming softly as he told me my mother's birthday was the only date that ever mattered. My fingers trembled as I spun the dials to match her date. The lock clicked open with a quiet finality that sent shivers down my spine. The metal door groaned as Dr. Reed lifted it, revealing a shadowed interior. For a moment, I just stood there, afraid of what I might find. Then the light from the hallway spilled in, illuminating rows of boxes stacked neatly against the walls. Everything smelled faintly of cedar and dust. As I stepped inside, I realized this wasn't just a storage unit. It was a fragment of my father's life, frozen in time. His handwriting labeled every box: books, memories, photos. My eyes caught the soft folds of my mother's shawl resting on top of an old trunk, still carrying the faint scent of her perfume. I pressed it to my face and felt tears burn behind my eyes. On a shelf sat his favorite novels, corners bent and annotated, and an old family photo of us at the lake, before everything fell apart. Dr. Reed stood silently, his hands clasped behind his back, letting me absorb the moment. I moved toward a weathered box tucked in the corner, heavier than it looked. Inside were more photo albums and personal documents, and at the very bottom, an envelope addressed in my father's unmistakable, shaky handwriting. For Ilara. My breath caught as I unfolded the letter. His words bled through the page in fading ink, but his voice echoed clearly in my mind. He wrote that he had known about Caleb and Brielle for months, how they had aligned themselves with a man named Marcus Thorne, a developer with a reputation for swallowing entire families through deceit and power. My father confessed he feared for his life, that his health was failing too quickly to be natural. He wrote, "This unit is my only refuge. The will they found is not the truth. It's bait for their greed. I needed to see who would show compassion when there was nothing left to gain. You did. That's why I trusted you with them, the only ones who could lead you here." The paper shook in my hands as I finished reading. Dr. Reed looked at me, eyes wide with quiet understanding. My father had known everything, the betrayal, the manipulation, even his own fate. He'd seen through them all and crafted a plan from beyond the grave. I folded the letter carefully, feeling a strange blend of sorrow and strength rising in me. This wasn't just an inheritance. It was a message of faith, proof that my father believed in me when no one else did. I looked around the storage unit again, surrounded by pieces of his life, and whispered, "I'll finish what you started, Dad." The letter haunted me for days. Every word from my father felt like a whisper guiding me forward, a map written in emotion rather than ink. I stayed at Dr. Reed's small guest room for a while, unable to sleep, rereading his message until a single phrase began to echo in my mind, "Where the truly valuable things are kept." He had underlined it twice in the letter, almost like he wanted me to remember. One quiet morning, as sunlight spilled through the window, I turned the old music box he had given me years ago in my hands. It was small, carved with delicate roses, the tune faint from age. Something about it felt heavier than I remembered. I tilted it, and a soft clink came from beneath the velvet lining. My pulse quickened. I pulled back the fabric, revealing a false bottom, and there it was, an old brass key tied with a faded blue ribbon. I instantly knew what it belonged to, our family's lake house. The one everyone assumed had been abandoned decades ago. Dr. Reed insisted on coming with me. The drive to the lake felt like traveling backward through time. Trees bending over cracked roads, the smell of damp earth growing stronger with each mile. When the house came into view, my heart tightened. The once beautiful retreat was now a shell of its former self. Windows shattered, ivy crawling up the walls, the porch sagging under years of neglect. Still, there was something defiant about it, standing tall against time and decay. I slid the key into the lock, and it turned effortlessly, as if it had been waiting. Inside, dust swirled in the dim light, settling on furniture draped in white sheets. Yet beneath the decay, I could still sense traces of warmth, my father's presence, my mother's laughter. We spent hours cleaning that day. Dr. Reed patched what he could while I swept through each room, restoring small pieces of memory with every stroke. Rex explored every corner, his tail wagging weakly, while Whisper and Shadow claimed the old fireplace as their throne. For the first time since everything fell apart, I felt something stirring inside me, not grief, but purpose. This ruined house, forgotten by everyone else, felt like a new beginning. My father had led me here, to a fortress built on what truly mattered: endurance, love, and quiet strength. But peace never stays long in my life. On the second evening, while I was scrubbing the kitchen counters, there was a knock at the door. A tall man in worn jeans and a work jacket stood outside, his face lined with years of hard labor. "Name's Harlan," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "Been living up the road a while. Didn't think anyone'd ever move back here." His tone carried curiosity, but also something darker: pity. When I explained who I was, recognition flickered in his eyes. He hesitated, then said quietly, "You might want to know the whole lakeside's been sold. Some outfit called Sheridan Developments. They're planning to clear everything out in about a month. Every structure here's marked for demolition." The words sank into me like ice. I forced a smile and thanked him, but as he walked away, I gripped the edge of the counter until my knuckles went white. Sheridan Developments. I'd heard that name before, in my father's letter. Marcus Thorne's empire. It wasn't a coincidence. They wanted this land too. My refuge wasn't just a home, it was another target. But this time, I wasn't the woman who had walked away broken. I looked around the decaying walls, the fading wallpaper, the life my father had protected, and I made a silent promise. They had taken everything from me once. They wouldn't do it again. Rage burned through me like wildfire, hotter than anything grief had ever been. I couldn't stop thinking about the names in my father's letter: Caleb, Brielle, Marcus Thorne. The puzzle pieces had finally aligned into something horrifyingly clear. I didn't want to wait, didn't want to think. I needed to see their faces when they realized I knew. Dr. Reed begged me to calm down, but there was no stopping the storm inside me. I drove straight to their new address, one of the luxury apartments Brielle had inherited. The moment she opened the door, her smirk told me she'd been expecting this confrontation. Caleb stood behind her, shirt unbuttoned, wearing the same gold watch my father had given him years ago. My stomach twisted. Without a word, I threw the letter at his chest. "Read it," I demanded. "He knew about you both. He knew everything you were doing with Marcus Thorne." Caleb didn't flinch. He picked up the letter, skimmed it, then laughed softly, handing it to Brielle. "Arthur always did have a wild imagination," he said with mock sympathy. Brielle leaned against the doorway, eyes glinting with disdain. "So what, Alara? You came all the way here to wave around a senile man's ramblings? You really should learn to let go." Her voice dripped with venom, each word sharper than the last. I could feel my control slipping, tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let them see me break. "You used him," I whispered. "You used me." Caleb's expression hardened, the facade of civility falling away. "You were always too naive to understand the world, Alara. You still are." Before I could respond, he reached into a drawer and pulled out a thick envelope. "You might as well sign these now and save yourself the trouble," he said, tossing it toward me. My hands shook as I opened it. Divorce papers. The date was stamped clearly, filed the very week my father died. "You already did this?" I choked out. He shrugged. "I knew you'd end up here eventually. And just to make things easier, I've frozen our accounts. You have nothing left tied to me, financially or otherwise." The words cut deeper than any insult. 12 years of marriage, erased with a pen stroke and a sneer. Brielle stepped forward, brushing imaginary dust from her silk blouse. "You should have known better, dear sister. Love doesn't pay bills." Her laughter followed me out the door, echoing like poison in my ears. The next morning, I went to the county clerk's office, clutching my father's letter like it could still protect me. I wanted proof, something to tether me to what was mine. The clerk, an elderly woman with kind eyes, typed my father's name into the database and frowned. "You said this was your family's lake property?" she asked. I nodded, heart pounding. She turned the screen toward me. My breath caught. The deed had been transferred 3 months before my father's death. The buyer's name glared up at me in black ink, Caleb Harrison. The man who'd once promised to build a future with me had stolen the last piece of my past. I felt the room tilt, a hollow ringing in my ears. He'd taken my home before my father's body was even cold. I walked out of the office in silence, the city noise fading into a dull hum. Everything inside me hurt, but beneath the pain, something else stirred resolve. Caleb thought he'd destroyed me, but he didn't understand. My father had taught me how to endure storms quietly, how to survive when stripped of everything. I wasn't done. Not yet. They might have taken my home, my money, even my name, but they would soon learn. Nothing stays buried forever. I couldn't let it end with their laughter. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Caleb's cold smile, Brielle's smug tilt of the head, the way they dismissed my father's name like it meant nothing. I needed to confront them publicly, to expose the truth where their lies couldn't hide. So when I found out they were having dinner at one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city, I dressed the part, forcing myself to look composed even as my hands trembled. The soft jazz music, the glimmering lights, the clinking of wine glasses, it all felt suffocating. When I spotted them across the room, I almost didn't recognize Caleb in his tailored suit, laughing comfortably beside Brielle, who flaunted a diamond ring so large it caught the chandelier's reflection. I walked straight to their table, ignoring the startled murmurs around me. "Tell them what you did," I demanded, voice low but steady. "Tell them how you both betrayed the man who trusted you." Caleb didn't even blink. Instead, he smiled, that politician's smile I once thought meant reassurance. "Elara," he said smoothly, "you shouldn't be here. We've been worried about you." His tone was loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Brielle placed a hand on his arm, playing her role flawlessly. "She's been struggling," she said sweetly, "ever since the divorce. We've tried to help, but she's unwell." Laughter rippled quietly through the room. I froze, realizing too late what they were doing. Caleb stood, addressing the curious diners like he was giving a speech. "My ex-wife is having a hard time letting go. Please forgive the scene." And then Brielle held up her hand, the diamond glittering mockingly. "We just got engaged," she announced, sealing my humiliation. Every pair of eyes turned toward me, pity, judgment, disgust. My voice caught in my throat as I tried to defend myself, but it was useless. To them, I was just a jealous, broken woman who couldn't move on. I turned and left before the tears could fall. Back at the lake house, I collapsed onto the dusty floorboards, the walls closing in around me. For the first time, I thought of giving up. But then a soft knock came at the door. Harlan stood there, his weathered face etched with concern. "I saw what happened," he said quietly. "You're stronger than they think." He stepped inside, looking around the house with familiarity. "You know," he continued, "your father spent a lot of time here before he passed. Said he was fighting with numbers day and night. Kept mentioning a man named Marcus Thorne. Said the name gave him a bad feeling. That name hit me like a jolt. Marcus Thorne. The same one from my father's letter, the same developer tied to Sheridan. It couldn't be coincidence. I followed Harlan to the back room my father once used as an office. The air was thick with dust, papers scattered everywhere. Among them, I found several old ledgers filled with dense financial notes. As I flipped through, a folded newspaper clipping slipped out, a photo of Marcus Thorne from years ago. In the margins, my father had written in his familiar, deliberate hand, "He's the key. He thinks no one remembers the Porter Falls project." I stared at the words until they blurred. My father hadn't been confused or paranoid. He'd been hunting something, uncovering a truth dangerous enough to cost him everything. Caleb and Brielle weren't just greedy. They were pawns in something far bigger. I sat back, the old floor creaking beneath me, and whispered to the empty room, "I'll finish what you started, Dad." Outside, the lake shimmered in the fading light, and for the first time since his death, I didn't feel alone. The unraveling had begun. Harlan had gone home for the evening, leaving me alone in the office with the faint scent of old paper and ink. Dr. Reed had insisted on visiting, saying he had information I needed before I dug any deeper. When he arrived, his face was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his glasses. I could see the weight of what he was about to tell me pressing down on him. "Elara," he began slowly. "The name you found in your father's notes, Porter Falls, it's more than a project." In 1999, Marcus Thorne was a junior partner at a financial firm that collapsed in a massive fraud scandal. The senior partners went to jail, but Thorne walked away untouched, wealthy beyond reason. That's when he started Sheridan Developments. I sat back, stunned. Everything suddenly made sense. The urgency in my father's voice, the careful instructions hidden in the collars, the secrecy surrounding the lake house. Thorne hadn't just wanted our land or your father's money. He had been orchestrating a much larger scheme. Dr. Reed's voice shook as he continued. He's using people like Caleb and Brielle to move money, launder assets, and acquire property quietly. Your father realized it. He began tracking the numbers from that original collapse, mapping every irregularity. He called it the 1999 ledger. The room felt colder as I absorbed this. Every late-night conversation with my father, every worried glance he had given, it all came into focus. My father hadn't been paranoid. He had been aware of the danger surrounding him. Dr. Reed's next words nearly made me drop the ledger in my lap. "Before he died, he told me something over the phone," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Luke," he said, speaking to me, "if they tell you it was my heart, don't believe them. Watch the numbers." The implications hit me like a physical blow. My father's death hadn't been natural. Caleb and Brielle's betrayal was only part of the story. Thorne's shadow had been cast over everything, orchestrating a network of deceit and destruction. My hands shook as I held the ledger tighter, realizing that every move I had thought was cruel misfortune was actually a calculated attempt to manipulate and control. My father hadn't simply been betrayed, he had been silenced. The realization made my stomach knot. Murder. That was the only word that fit. I glanced around the office, the fading daylight casting long shadows across the room, and whispered to myself, all of it. It was never just about money. It was about survival, and he paid the ultimate price. Dr. Reed sat quietly beside me, giving me space to let the truth settle. The anger I had felt toward Caleb and Brielle now deepened into something darker, more focused. My father's warnings weren't just notes or puzzles. They were a call to action. I would find the rest, uncover every link in Thorne's network, and make sure that the man who destroyed my father's life couldn't do the same to anyone else. The pieces were finally in place, and I knew what I had to do. The night was unnervingly still, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes every creak feel like a threat. Harlan and I were combing through old files in the office, piecing together what my father had left behind. I barely registered the faint crunch of tires on gravel until a shadow fell across the window. My stomach dropped. Before I could react, the roar of an engine shattered the quiet. 2 men, massive and silent, appeared outside. Within minutes, the house erupted into chaos. They smashed cabinets, scattered papers, and sent my father's cherished heirlooms crashing to the floor. Rex, never one to back down, growled and lunged, only to be kicked aside, whining in pain. Whisper and Shadow darted beneath furniture, hissing, terrified yet protective. By the time the men vanished, the living room looked like a war zone. Broken glass glittered in the dim moonlight, books lay in ruin, and shards of porcelain littered the floor. Amid the destruction, my eyes caught one object untouched, a tiny figurine from my father's old music box. Its porcelain surface gleamed mocking in the dim light. A note scrawled in thick black marker leaned against it. Stop digging. My chest tightened. This wasn't random vandalism. It was a warning, personal and deliberate, meant to strike fear into me. But instead of fear, a chill of determination slid down my spine. I knelt to retrieve the figurine, fingers brushing the smooth surface, and felt the heat of anger rise steadily inside me. This attack, meant to intimidate, had done the opposite. I straightened, scanning the wreckage with sharp focus, knowing every piece of broken memory now fueled the plan I was forming. Harlan helped me right a fallen bookshelf, revealing a thin layer of dust hiding a narrow seam in the wall. I pressed along the edges and, with a soft click, discovered a hidden compartment. Inside rested a single, unlabeled audio cassette. My pulse quickened. Whoever sent these men thought they could scare me into retreating, but they had only drawn me closer to the truth. Holding the cassette, I felt a spark of clarity ignite, a cold, focused fury settling in. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The cassette clicked, the tape whirring to life, and then his voice filled the room, steady, commanding, unmistakably my father's. Every word cut through the tension, unraveling the threads of lies and deception I had been chasing blindly. He spoke of Marcus Thorne, of schemes that stretched back decades, and of the roles Caleb and Brielle had played in executing them. Then, almost as if reading my thoughts, he explained the collars, the animals. They weren't merely keepsakes. They were tests, markers of judgment, and the very guides that led me to uncover his hidden truths. My hands shook as I listened, every revelation more staggering than the last. He went on to describe a final safeguard. The original 1999 ledgers, the true will, entrusted not to anyone in our immediate circle, but to Eleanor, my estranged godmother, the one person Thorne could never coerce. I had never expected her to be part of this puzzle, yet the proof of my father's foresight now felt like a lifeline. Swallowing my pride, I tracked her down, unsure whether she would help or push me away. At first, she slammed her door in my face, fear plain in her eyes. Later, driven by her own desperation after Thorne's men had threatened her grandson, she returned, shaken and vulnerable, and placed the documents into my hands. I barely breathed as I sifted through the papers, realizing the magnitude of what I held. Among the ledgers, letters, and contracts, one document caught my attention, a birth certificate. My chest tightened as I read the name listed as Brielle's father, Marcus Thorne. The truth hit me like a physical blow. Brielle had never been Arthur's daughter. She was the carefully planted heir of a man who had orchestrated our ruin from the start. Everything had been a calculated move to secure an empire, and I had been caught in the crossfire of a father protecting a secret legacy. The full scope of the betrayal, the manipulation, and my father's meticulous planning crashed over me, leaving a mix of grief and resolve. This was no longer just about reclaiming what was taken. It was about exposing the truth and finally closing the chapter my father had started decades ago. I knew the moment had come. Word had reached me that Caleb and Brielle were hosting a grand engagement celebration at my father's old apartment, an event meant to flaunt their victory, to rub salt in wounds I had long carried. But I wasn't going to be a silent spectator. With Dr. Reed, Harlan, and Eleanor by my side, we quietly prepared, every detail calibrated for one purpose: to turn their night of triumph into the stage for truth. The dress I chose was black, simple, elegant, intended to blend in at first, but carry authority when the time came. As I entered, the chandeliers glimmered, laughter and clinking glasses filling the air. Caleb raised his glass, the epitome of arrogance, to toast what he believed was a new chapter of dominance. I waited, heart steady, until the right moment. Then, over the sound system, my father's voice filled the room. Every syllable, every revelation carried the weight of years of planning, exposing Marcus Thorne, the manipulations, and the purpose of the animals that had guided me. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Caleb's confident smirk faltered, but he attempted to regain control, waving the accusations off. Harlan stepped forward, pressing play on a recording no one had expected, him bribing him, clearly documenting Caleb's corruption. Cameras flashed as journalists, tipped off by Eleanor, captured every moment, every lie unraveling in real time. Then I spoke, revealing the deepest truth. Brielle was not Arthur's daughter. The shock hit the room like a wave. The carefully built illusion Thorne had constructed for decades collapsed instantly, leaving his empire and Caleb's schemes exposed before the entire city elite. By the time law enforcement arrived, armed with the documents and recordings we had gathered, both Thorne and Caleb were being led away in handcuffs, their power evaporated in one night. Months later, I had rebuilt my life from the ashes. The apartments were sold, their value redirected towards something meaningful. The lake house, now restored and renamed Arthur's Ark, a sanctuary for animals left abandoned or forgotten. Rex, Whisper, and Shadow roamed freely, guardians of the legacy my father had entrusted me to protect. Dr. Reed, Harlan, and Eleanor had become more than allies, they were family. Every corner of the house reflected resilience, love, and dedication, a tribute to my father's foresight. For the first time in years, I breathed fully, knowing victory wasn't rooted in revenge, but in justice, compassion, and honoring the man who had believed in me when no one else did. After everything Caleb, Brielle, and Thorne did, I finally took control of my life and exposed the truth. But I still wonder, was leaving the past behind the right choice, or could I have handled it differently? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Share your opinion, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for more real-life stories like mine.